Welcome to Ready Set Exec, the podcast where we sit down with executives across North America to unpack their business, leadership, and expertise.
And every other week, join us for Market Watch, all things hiring, real insights and no fluff. Hey everyone, I'm here with Gina Riley, career transition coach and author of Qualified Isn't Enough, and creator of the Career Velocity System, helping executives position themselves as a candidate of choice. A former Fortune 50 HR leader and executive search consultant, she's guided leaders into C-suite and board roles across industries. A recognized thought leader, Gina is a LinkedIn top voice, Forbes Coaches Council contributor, and two-time Disrupt HR speaker with national and international appearances. So thanks for coming on again with us. You were on our webinar multiple times, and we love having you. So it's good to have a nice one-on-one conversation now.
Thank you. Well, I always love talking with you, John. So this is going to be awesome.
Yeah. So, we were, I saw the intro of your book there, and maybe tell us a little bit about, what does it mean to be qualified isn't enough as an executive, right?
Well, for starters, the title is kind of in your face, isn't it?
Yeah.
And but the reason for the title is because you and I hear this all the time from job seekers. I applied to 200 jobs over the last 3 months, and I didn't get a single call back, and I was qualified for all of them, right? And there is not one leader that I have shown the title to, and they have disagreed with it. They've all nodded, or it has sucked in their breath like, oh my gosh, that's exactly true. Why is that? Our job market is flooded with qualified people, and it takes so much more to stand out. So the book, just to answer your question more directly, it's my 9-step model. It follows my career velocity system, and it helps people build their story, their unique story. So phase 1 is developing your unique value proposition. It takes 5 chapters and more than a third of the book to get there. Then the midsection is phase 2, preparing your marketing. We have to have a resume. We have to have a LinkedIn profile. And that's the first place most people want to go. And what I am telling the reader is take a step back, and you better figure out your entire unique value proposition so that you have flexible stories to tell to each decision maker. Again, in phase 2, though, once you get your marketing done, now you need to do interview prep. And my interview prep is called the Rare Candidate Framework, which requires up to 40 hours of research and preparation for senior level roles. And then there's job search strategy. So those are the 3 chapters in the middle. And then the 9th chapter is on thought leadership, because you and I know that when we go to market and when we're assessing talent and we're looking through LinkedIn profiles, and we can see LinkedIn posts with people's genuine, authoritative thought leadership about topics that relate to their industry and their field, we know that we're in the right spot.
Totally makes sense. And it's good to have a structure as well, so people know, okay, I can progress through. Like, I love when there's a workflow, right? So same thing with applying for jobs and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
So for executive leaders now, obviously the market's been flooded. I mean, I know in the last month, I've had tons of supply chain executives reach out to me because that industry's just gotten decimated with the tariffs and whatnot. Like, either they're directly affected by tariffs or their customers are, and so they're shutting down ops, and a lot of people have lost their roles. So they've been calling me up, wanting to get into our network. And part of the question for them is, okay, if supply chain is kind of dead right now, are you good? They're all thinking, oh, I'll make a pivot, right? And so I think for them, they're thinking, what can I get into? And so being able to sort of do some self-assessment, I think, is part of your process to self-assess. So when you say unique value proposition that you have as a candidate, like, how does that pertain? I mean, we're not products. Well, I guess, that's what you normally say in marketing, right? Unique value proposition for selling a car or a toothpaste or whatever. So how do you come up with yours as an executive? That's it's interesting.
Yes, I have a couple things to answer. You said a lot of juicy things. One is, I believe that each of us is a business solution. You as an executive search consultant, John, you go to market and you're looking for the solution to a company's problem. That makes us the commodity, the job seeker. So we do need to position ourselves as the business solution. And that's what the unique value proposition work is about. Now, for the readers of my book, Everyone should start with the introduction, because in the introduction, I outline the career velocity system. And I say, if you are planning a career pivot, which is what you just talked about with supply chain, I ask people to read chapter 8 first. And here's why. That's the job search strategy chapter. And what people are doing is, instead of networking for prospects for jobs, they're networking for information. And I give 2 frameworks for holding informational conversations. Because, for example, if these supply chain people start trying to position themselves for something else, but the messaging isn't aligned, they're not going to get calls, and their network cannot refer them because they won't be able to see, how they align with that different job. Like, I don't get it. And you've probably been in position too as a recruiter. You're like, I don't get it, and I'm not going to guess. I'm going to keep going to a more obvious choice on paper. And so, starting with chapter 8, gathering information, backing into the unique value proposition, building that up through chapters 1 through 5 so that you can start positioning yourself in your marketing and your LinkedIn.
Totally makes sense. And I think it's good, especially if you lose your job, to have conversations with your network about, where would you see me next? Asking that question too, like, where could I go, and getting some information. I know I've been able to give some advice, but very much it comes down to, well, what's your skill set? What drives you every day to go to work? What kind of work is engaging for you and fun, and you're going to be motivated to do? And if you have that motivation, that, like, if you're a people ops person and you like working with people, well, maybe you're used to being in a warehouse in the supply chain, right? But that also could translate to a manufacturing warehouse, or even a white collar office environment where you're managing a team. You have a lot of headcount. You're good with a big headcount of people you're dealing with. So, like, it's transferable skills. I think a lot of times we have to self-assess and find.
Mm-hmm.
So I get that, in terms of, like, get the information, understand the possible pivots you can make, and then build a proposition for the new position you're going for. What worked in supply chain, you may be talking about Six Sigma, lean shipping, and agile and stuff like that, and do those skill sets transfer to other industries? So you have
Yeah.
to kind of think about that, and how are you going to market yourself? So that makes sense, and I can appreciate that sort of methodology of thinking about it, right? Because I think a lot of job seekers are so stunned by losing their job, they got caught up in their head, right? It's like the bird is making a nest in their head of bad thoughts and self-doubt and all these things, right? The psychological impact is quite huge, and taking a step back, breathing, and then being able to make a plan, I think is a really good one. So when you were in exec search, I mean, what did you find was some of the major issues, let's say, with executives? Like, a lot of times we're looking at the resume, they're qualified, or not qualified enough, let's say, but the soft skills is something that we don't really talk about too much, but it's actually part of, as an exec search consultant, which you did before too, it's a big part of the recruitment process, right? Finding those soft skills. How do you vet soft skills in interviews and stuff? What do you recommend for that?
Yeah. And so in this case, you and I are speaking to not just the job seeker, we're speaking to the hiring managers out there, and leadership teams, and even boards of directors, because a lot of times hiring managers all the way up to boards who are part of the decision-making process are using a gut feel to assess candidates. And you and I know that taking more of a skill-based approach and asking questions to unearth those skills, and what we're listening for are the soft skills in how people executed. So there's preparing those SOAR stories, what was the situation and the obstacles, actions, and results. But as a recruiter, I'm listening for the how behind the execution. Did they bring people along with them? Were they having to collaborate cross-functionally across teams where they didn't have position power to execute on a really big project, for example? That is no small thing when a leader is sitting in the middle of an ecosystem and may or may not have a team at all, and is pulling together people from around the globe to execute on some multi-million or billion-dollar project. So I am listening for teamwork. I'm listening for their ability to listen, their curiosity, humility, and we can hear all of that when we're speaking to someone.
Yeah, I totally can relate to those kind of questions you got to be asking to really, probing questions, not just yes, no answers, really getting them to talk about. And we find this too when you're trying to dig deep into KPIs and so on, whether they're saying, well, I did it or my team did it, right? In terms of how they got their results. And if they've ever had to have some kind of dotted line or straight line management, that's also things to look for. So I understand that. And, we were discussing also, I think, a little bit about executive presence, right? And how that's, it is a skill. It's something you take and develop over time. I know you're very passionate about this topic. I've heard you talk about it a lot, but for people that don't really know, what do we mean by executive presence and how do you cultivate that as an executive?
Yeah, you and I have talked about this a couple of times, and I actually spoke in Lisbon for the Career Thought Leaders 2 years ago on this topic. And it's something that career coaches really like to understand as well to help coach their coaching clients. So I take my information from a book called Executive Presence, The Difference Between Merit and Success. And it's these 3 main dimensions. It's appearance, how we look, communication, how we speak, and gravitas, how we act or how we behave. Now, we can control some aspects of our appearance and some we cannot. For example, I can't control whether I'm tall or not. And that's one of the 6 elements of appearance. Now, that said, we can show up on the Zoom screen or in those interview rooms and look like we mean business. And we're reading the room and things, and we're, ditching the eyeglassware that makes us look old and getting frames that are more modern, whatever that is, to just show up and seem like that sharp, modern person. Once we do that, the judgment has been made in 3 seconds. That's it. That's all we get. Now we're talking about communication and gravitas. And among the 17 elements of executive presence, I think one of the most important things is reading the room. And I talk about this in chapter 7 in my rare candidate framework. The rare candidate framework for interviews is, first, you're going to do research, 40 hours if you're at the CEO and CXO level. Then you're going to align your stories to the job. The third thing is reading the room. And that means you are assessing what a 25-year-old first-line recruiter needs to be successful in their job and not dismissing them and treating them as if they're not important in the process, because they're a decision maker, all the way up to a board of directors and everyone in between, the hiring manager, etc. So reading the room and modifying the way that you're speaking with people and treating people with respect is, I think, one of the most important things that a candidate can do. Now, again, 17 elements of executive presence within the 3 dimensions. Confidence and decisiveness are 1 and 2.
Yeah, and I think that's one thing I always like to tell job seekers is if you lost your job and you're feeling down on yourself, work on that. Work on that before you get into an interview, because they'll smell the desperation, they'll smell the fear, they'll see the lack of confidence if you're really feeling, self-pity or whatever, or doubt, like you have to bring your A game to go to an interview. And it's a mental battle as well as it is, an application battle of finding the job and getting in, right? So I think that's something we often overlook is like how you show up, right? How you show up to the interview prepared. You're talking about 40 hours of review. That's quite a bit. I mean, I think with ChatGPT, you may be able to cut that down a little bit, but I mean, in general, you got to know your stuff. You got to know the company, the industry, where you're doing it. I think the more research you do, you probably are feeling more confident because now, okay, I understand the business really well now. I know what they're doing. I know their value proposition as the company. I've researched the profiles of the people I'm going to be meeting, all those little things you need to do so that you're going in with at least a pretty good understanding of the role and what's expected, and then be able to speak and, use your unique value proposition, right?
Absolutely. I say that your plan is to be the most prepared person in the room, in every single room, virtual or otherwise. And you're ready to ask questions. We make our own assumptions when we do this research, but then we're checking our assumptions with humility and saying, when I was doing some research about X, Y, and Z, or I was listening to your earnings report, or fill in the blank. And you're right, ChatGPT, amazing for cutting down the research time. When I wrote this book, John, we were all just using the AI tools, and here it is like a year later, and it's so much better. When I'm preparing my clients for interviews and I prepare their interview packet, I'm preparing a CEO right now for a massive job, and it's 30 pages of research that I have prepared for him with like links to all these different things. He has to cross-reference whether or not the links are all accurate and true. And I put that qualifier in there, but there's so much homework for him to do. And if he wants to win this job, he has to show up to compete and win, not just to show up to compete.
Yeah, I think people underestimate the level of competition right now when you have such high unemployment and a lot of candidates out looking for work. It's been a very weird job market. What are your thoughts on the job market right now? I mean, sometimes I think the news is telling me good news, and then other times it's all doom and gloom. It's really, it depends on the day almost.
You know, I think that you said it best when you were describing how many people have been laid off in a particular line of work like supply chain. Because I don't know if you get asked this question, but I get asked by people all the time, which is, what are you seeing? Tell me from your perspective, what are you seeing? You and I are seeing a lot of job seekers and a lot less jobs for them to align to. And that's just the truth. And I'm not saying it to scare anybody. I'm not saying that to stir up more business for myself or anyone else. It's tough. And it's part of the reason why I contract with people for a really long window of time. I work with people for it's a 9-month engagement, because it's taking people that long, even at the C-suite levels, especially at the C-suite levels, to land. And I have multiple stories, and I talk about it in the book. 4 months to get the job offer, 6 months to get the job offer after 21 interviews. These decision makers are scared to get it wrong because it costs so much. And so it's taking a long time. So if you're in one of these competitions, you need to have endurance, and you need to keep yourself really positive, like you had said, like keeping that confidence up.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, we're literally telling all our job seekers, have heart. It's going to be 6 to 9 months at least.
Mm-hmm.
Buckle down. You may be looking at maybe a possible survival job in the interim, or fractional work is another avenue for people to take to be able to make ends meet until they land where they want to land. Because, yeah, like, who's got 9 months of savings in this economy, right? To be able to just not work and just stay at home and apply for jobs for 9 months, it can be very grueling. And
Absolutely.
but
That it makes
mindset,
me think,
right?
one thing, John, is in my job search strategy section of the book, it's chapter 8, I highlight 5 strategies that people can use to help move into jobs more quickly and to be seen and heard for your expertise versus relying on job boards. And I call the series How Your Next Executive Role Finds You, which is kind of titillating. I think, like, ooh, okay, how do I get people to find me? And a couple of the strategies range from volunteer leadership. And one of the interviews that I did was with a woman who is like the leader of SHRM, her HR organization in her state. She got tapped for her last 3 VP jobs because she's seen as an authority. I mean, that's incredible. I have another story about a man who spent 3 years consulting because he was making a massive pivot, and people were not seeing him as the obvious choice, no matter how much they liked him. And 3 years later, he got tapped in the hidden job market for his first CEO job because of that specific method. So there's 5 methods that I talk about that could be helpful to people in the audience.
So when we talk about hidden job market, what does that mean to someone that's, they're like, what do you mean hidden job market?
Love
So what's
talking
the
about the
secret
hidden
here?
job. Okay,
What's the secret?
so many people, when they first hear that phrase, it kind of burns them up a little bit inside. Their blood boils. Here's the hidden job market. It is when a group of people on a team, it could be a board of directors, it could be a leadership team, they're sitting at the table together, and somebody raises their hand and says, I'm going on a medical leave, or I'm leaving for another opportunity outside the company, or I'm retiring, or someone whispers, we're going to let John go, and we don't want the customers out there to know about it because then they'll think something's wrong. We're going to start asking people who we know first. That's the first. So any leader who's listening to this conversation right now, if you're being honest with yourself, when someone leaves your team, the first thing that you're not thinking is, I got to go hang up a shingle out on a job board. You're thinking, who do I know? Who do you know? Who do we know? And who can you refer to me to start getting conversations going stat? Because we need to fill this seat with a qualified person. So the job in the hidden job market is not hiding behind a planter in a room away from any of you. It is where it's just percolating and being discussed. It's not on a job board yet. And I can tell you many times, even if you are identified and you're the leading candidate, it still might go to market. And now you have to compete to win.
Yeah, I mean, some companies just by policy will post the role regardless, even if they have candidates in play, just to say it was a fair process, right, and whatnot. So I totally get that.
Mm-hmm.
I know for us and many other search firms that we don't post the roles on Indeed or LinkedIn. We're not going to spend the money to do that. So you may not even see the role. There is that hidden market of search firms working on certain roles that are either confidential searches where we don't even, we can't announce who the client is yet because they're doing, we call it, a pull and plant, where you need to remove someone quietly and replace them. And I mean, it's usually a very important position that can affect the the news cycle and whatnot. It depends what it is. So I mean,
Absolutely.
there's
And these
dollars attributed to it.
it's sensitive. It's sensitive. And people, I think a lot of times people don't like the idea that that is the way some of these roles are filled. And on the other hand, people want to be seen as an authority and to be found and plucked out of obscurity. And what I talk about in this book is do not wait to get plucked out of obscurity. And especially if your LinkedIn profile is anemic, it's probably not going to happen, because as AI gets better and better, your fully optimized LinkedIn profile is going to be one of your biggest assets, because that's Googleable. That's how we're finding people. And our companies that contract with us, right, John, when you go to market, they want to know you scoured the market and you brought them the best people you could find who probably already are working and have a seat.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of our selling points is going after an exhaustive search, right?
Mm-hmm.
An exhaustive search means that all avenues are exhausted, and you're exhausted doing it as well.
And
That's what I
how?
tell my clients. We've done a good job when we're exhausted too, just as the market is. So yeah, no, you have to really take your time, find the right people, get in front of them, and some of them are active, some are passive. And I don't want to ever say, someone unemployed is not a good candidate either. We absolutely look at both employed and unemployed candidates, but exhaustive means you've searched everywhere, right?
Absolutely.
Anyone that's qualified and also hits the specific criteria. I think one of the big things we're seeing now in the tight job market like this is that companies are becoming more and more particular about they want the exact same thing. Like if you've been in the role for 5 years, they want to hire someone that's been in the role for 5 years, done the exact same thing as their predecessor for a competitor potentially. They're very picky because they realize, look, we're going to get 100 applicants or 1,000 applicants on Indeed or LinkedIn. Mm-hmm. So what's going to differentiate them? Well, they've done the exact role, they've shown success, and they've done it for a competitor of ours. So less risk, right? They're more risk averse when there's a lot of candidates. So they don't want to risk it too much. They want exactly what they want, and show me the unicorn. That's what we hear a lot, right? During COVID, for example, when the market it was a candidate market,
Mm-hmm.
companies were a little more open to transitioning people that were non-traditional candidates, let's say, or not exactly fit in the box perfectly, because they're like, hey, there's not that many people available. It's getting very expensive for us. We were seeing offers, $50K over asking. So you could definitely you can massage some candidates into some roles that weren't the perfect unicorn, right? But now they've gone back to, we want a unicorn and we want them in the office too. That's the new ask. We want the unicorn and we want them in our office. That is the ask now from clients, unfortunately. But you got to work with
the thing
market.
that job seekers need to realize is this is based on trends. I mean, we've got socioeconomic and political factors that are impacting our entire ecosystem. And so it's nobody's specific fault, but you have to recognize that that's what's, happening to all of us. And one thing that you brought up that makes me think about the hiring managers side of this, like speaking to them, is if you're well skilled in conducting interviews and uncovering skills, and you have an open mind to ask some of those out of the box questions. And I'm not talking about weird hypothetical, like how many pennies are there in Portland kind of questions, like real skill-based questions. You can unearth things that are nuanced about a candidate that might help you understand why they're unique, special, or different. But what I would say to the job seeker is if you don't develop your UVP, unique value proposition, and you're not completely understanding how you can use those sharp tools within your toolkit to make an impression on those hiring managers so you're the obvious choice, you're going to have a very difficult time, especially in a career pivot, unless you get referred and people are advocating for you.
Yeah, I mean, referrals is always one of the most effective ways to get a position. A lot of times it can also create bias when hiring, and that's kind of the rub. On one hand, yes, you want a job, someone can refer you. But overall, we refer people we like, people that look like us, and in hiring that can cause, sort of that group think of hiring where the whole company looks the same because they're all friends of friends of friends, and you get the clubhouse kind of company. I've seen that lots, especially like family offices and stuff where you can have a lot of nepotism and then you're hiring all the friends of the family and it becomes a big problem. When someone gets let go, it's like, oh, why'd you let go of Susie? She was coming to our Christmas bake for cookies this weekend. We've had some companies too where they're like, oh, we play pickleball every Friday. We have to they have to be able to play pickleball with us if we're hiring them. Those are the criteria. So bias is still around in recruitment for sure.
It's such a good point, but I love how you brought this issue up because that's the reason to hire someone like you, someone that's bringing that unbiased lens, or at least having a bias toward diversity. And when we say diversity, it's diversity of thought. It's diversity of experiences. What these companies really need is a fit to values. A lot of times we talk about, oh, we need a culture fit. Well, I challenge that. What underpins a healthy culture or any company culture, even if it's not healthy? Their values. And it's not just the stated values on the company website, it's how they behave in relationship to those values. So if that's not aligned, then there could be a real problem. But what we're looking for with our candidates is not culture fit. We're looking to see, will your value system and how you operate work in this environment? Because the whole environment's not going to change for you. So make sure that it's a good fit for you, or else you're going to feel really stuck in that role.
Yeah, it's one thing for sure I've seen a lot more of recently is people, I think because just society's gotten so crazy that people are kind of saying, hold on a second, let's get back to some kind of values like that are universal that we can all agree on. And I've seen recently too, just people wanting to like values starting to mean more again. It's starting to become like more, a differentiator, let's say, to have those values. And in talking to other leaders too, it like a lot of the conversations I've been having, even on this podcast, it comes back to the values of the leaders, the values that they bring to work, them as people, being good people and treating people with respect and all that. And it's amazing how just, working on being a better person can help your career as well, right? Surprisingly enough, it's not just, the rat race, as we always say.
I feel heartened that you brought this up. I mean, this is my takeaway from this conversation today. It makes me feel really good to hear that's what you're hearing when you're talking to companies. In chapter 1 of my book, I talk about taking a profile assessment called the UMAP, YOUMAP. People can find it online at myumap.com. And I have a discount code in chapter 1 from the creator for people to take it. And what they get from the assessment is their top 5 strengths from StrengthsFinder that tells me how you do what you do with your natural talents. It's not a personality assessment. 2, values assessment. 3, motivated skills and burnout skills. What really excites you in your job. And then a personality assessment called the Holland. But let's talk about values. The way that I use this assessment is I ask my clients to define each of the values, because if you and I have a value that's the same, we may define it differently. Let's just say I value freedom and you value freedom. If we assign a definition to that, it might look very different. That's an example.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what happens is when I have a client who's lucky enough to have two opportunities going at the same time, and they go, Gina, I don't know what to do. I don't know which way I should turn, which offer I should take. I pull up the UMAP assessment and the debrief we've done, and I read them the 3 sentences with the top 3 of the 10 values that will guide their decision making. Because if they choose an opportunity that goes up against their value system, that is what's going to give them a sick stomach. They won't be able to sleep at night. So I read it back to them, and I'll say, when you had an experience with all those people within those ecosystems, which one where can you live out your values? And they usually go, I think I know which one I should do.
Yeah. No, it's true. And actually, I can give a recent example of this. We're working with a startup. They want to build out the entire team with us, right? Which is a really exciting, fun project. One of the things we zeroed in on right off the bat with the CEO who's hired us for this project is, let's see what his values are about. What is he all about? What is his ethos about work and so on? And, not to say that you want to create a family, as people always throw around that terrible term in corporate.
Yeah.
Family doesn't fire you to boost the share price, but the idea, of families, more of, aligned values. I like to think of it as we're a competitive sports team. We're all rowing in the same direction. We have a shared goal and vision of what we want to do.
Mm-hmm.
And we share values in terms of what we want to do as well, right? We value hard work. We value whatever the values may be of the organization, right? So, talking with him, we were able to sort of zero in on what he's looking for. And it's not a qualitative thing as much as, a gut feeling maybe about the employee, that he wants to feel, for example, that his employees are willing to go the extra mile, work really hard, have that work ethic, that determination and tenacity, that he's looking for. And so that's, those kind of shared values that he's looking for is something you can definitely screen for, because, there's definitely people that have a different view of work, right? Some people view work as, I'm going to work 9 to 5, clock out, go home. And then there's others that, no, I'm going to do whatever is needed because we're trying to grow, we're trying to build. In a startup, this is kind of needed, that hustle kind of mentality.
Yeah.
It can also be toxic as well, depending on, there's got to be a limit, but needless to say, that kind of drive, he's looking for high drive individuals, right?
Yes. And you know what I love that you said is we can screen for this. I think that hiring teams get a little nervous and scared that, how am I going to figure out if someone's tenacious? How am I going to figure out how an individual will go the extra mile? That is in well-crafted behavioral interview questions aligned to the tasks at hand, and not pulled off the shelf asking, tell me about a time when you failed. That is not a great question to ask anybody. It must be in context of the job, so that job seeker, who hopefully is prepared to answer questions, can contextualize it and then talk about stories of going the extra mile without overtly asking, tell me about a time you went the extra mile, right?
Yeah, I mean, you don't make it so easy for them to just game the system, right? I mean, people are smart and they can kind of know what you're asking. But if you're having a conversation of like, oh, I see you were in university, and I also see you overlap with some of your work, and then they go on, I was working 2 jobs, and I was going to school, and I was, doing all these things. You're like, wow, like, you can suss these things out without having to straight up say, well, what was the hardest period of your life, and what did you do to overcome these obstacles?
Yes, and that's absolutely ridiculous. I think it's the most lazy thing any company can do. And when I have done executive search, I've been very privileged to have the company hire our team to go in and do interview skills training, because those of us on our team have the behavioral interviews certification from 2 decades ago. I won't say how old I am right now, but I have taught I've stood up and taught for 6 hours the board of a whole organization how to assess for skills. And usually they walk away saying, I've been doing it wrong my entire career.
Yeah, I mean, interview is not something you can learn in half an hour, right? Like that's the thing. It's a soft skill, just like any other executive skill. It takes time and a lot of effort to learn what works. It's also knowing people. That those soft skills take years to get. I can tell you, for me, like after 15 years in recruitment, like I'm still learning. Even now, I'm learning. I'm improving my craft. How to, the questions to ask, how to get to the right thing, and it's not to be underestimated as a skill set. Absolutely.
I think that's why you're so good at what you do, though. And that's why people hire you and you keep getting referred. One time, John, I was doing this interview skills training, and we do a breakout where in a triad, we practice. Like they actually have to build a mini job profile. They have to come up with a couple of behavioral questions related to the skills within the profile, and then they practice it. And I happened to be in the trio with the VP of sales of a $4 billion company. So we were going through the practice, and he was visibly like just a little bit shaking as he was practicing with me. And he goes, I am really nervous because this is a man in his late 50s, early 60s, and he was nervous because he hadn't practiced asking skills in this way. And he admitted, I've been using my gut feel my whole career because I just have a sense of people. I'm a salesperson. But that's not how you assess skills. That's how you assess likability. And like you said, it also lends toward us not choosing a diverse workforce because we want to pick people in our own likeness, and that lends to biased hiring decisions.
Yeah, I mean, the whole thing of hiring with your gut, I think, I can unequivocally say, listen, your gut can be wrong, quite often, and the thing is too, is like, if you're dealing with salespeople in particular, these people have charisma. These people are literally, that's what they do, is sell. So they will try to sell themselves as a candidate. They will talk a good game.
Mm-hmm.
There's got to be a little bit more thorough vetting in terms of not only what they're saying, but also the KPI that they're mentioning, right? So digging down into their metrics, having them explain their funnel to you. And usually you can suss out when there's some BS numbers, that are coming out of it. Really quickly, it's like, if your deal size is $1,000, how did you sell $2 million? You're selling 10 sales a day or something. You got to multiply it out, and you're like, oh, that doesn't make sense. In any logical way, it doesn't make sense. So yeah, it's sort of understanding the sales process too. And that's, for us, like what we've tried to do is really focus on just a few roles that we really either have done ourselves, like worked the job previously, where, it's like I've done sales, I've done operations and HR, my business partner's done similar marketing and sales and so on. Like we've really zeroed in on certain role types that we work on. And I think it's the mix of both the practical experience of having done the job, but then also the recruitment experience. I've recruited for it as well. So I've been a hiring manager for salespeople as well. And so I've done those mistakes. I've hired on gut before. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Like, oh, I love these people. I love to work with them. Right. And then, you find out that they're missing skills, or they just talked a good game, or the soft skills, or even the values weren't aligned after. You're like, well, I'd have a beer with this person, but I wouldn't pay them to do, some of my best friends are like, I tell them, like, I as a friend, I would do anything for you. You call me in the middle of the night, I'll be there, to help you hide the body or whatever. But I'm not gonna hire you just because I know we wouldn't work together well, or you're just not a good fit for and so on, right? Like so those kind of things are important to think about. And so what we tell people is, I always hear this from CEOs, well, I can recruit too, or we'll do it ourselves. I'm like, yes, but like, sorry to say, but look at your team. You guys all look like a frat party at this place. Don't you want to bring in some, different kinds of experiences and so on? And, maybe you don't see the problem when you're like in it, because it just seems like, oh, it's working fine.
It's fine. Yeah.
It's been working so far. And it's funny because I've seen this too, where there's like the whole SEAL teams look very similar. It's like young white dudes, right? And I'll be like, well,
like a bro culture, and yeah.
Yeah, and then it's like, well, it's hard to change a culture that you've built, and it's so ingrained and entrenched now that making changes later is really tough.
Mm-hmm.
It's really hard to make the change without really having some major upheaval.
Totally.
And so if you can get it right from the beginning, where you're doing an exhaustive process, you're bringing in the best talent.
Yeah.
And by definition, we avoid the conversation about diversity by saying we do an exhaustive search. And by doing an exhaustive search, you will get diversity because we've covered everybody. Right.
And that's
And
what we
so,
do. Like that's on
yeah,
us as recruiters. And for those of us that do it well and do it right, that's our lens. And we're going to those places that will create a diverse pool. Not unqualified, by the way. Everyone will be qualified before they get put forward and vetted, but we want that diversity because we want to know that there's choices and options.
yeah, absolutely. Choices and options, and also like not losing out on good talent because we have our own inherent biases. And I think for everybody to realize, like, look, we all have some kind of bias. When I took the unconscious bias training, for me, that was really eye-opening because I was like, oh, I realized, oh, you're right. Like there is some things that we don't, it's not intentional. It's not being, prejudice or anything like that. It's just really just like people like people that are like them, and they just tend to gravitate towards them, and everyone does it. And there's certain biases that you may have as well as an individual from your experiences.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to be aware of them. Like all you can do is try to reduce it. You'll never be bias free.
No.
But you're going to at least say, okay, there's certain things I tend to lean towards. We got to think about that, and maybe have what I always like to do before I hire someone was have a third party interview them as well to hear their thoughts. I always did that when I was a manager. I would always do that. I would say, listen, I want to hire this person, but before we hire them, meet with someone that's neutral, like our assistant manager or someone else or another manager, and then hear what they had to say. Someone that's completely different from me.
Yeah.
Just want to hear what you think. And sometimes they would give me a perspective about, I know you really like them, but this is what I found different. And it can definitely affect your decision making because you're like, oh, I didn't think about that because I was too in it, right? You're too tunnel vision on the hiring. So
I think
food for
that's
thought, I guess.
awesome. That's awesome because, if you have internal teammates that you trust and you trust, their sensibility, then that can be really effective. And also the candidate has an opportunity to rise up and read the room like we were talking about before and not be dismissive of a third party perspective because they might feel like that's a throwaway interview. And sometimes it's like the moment that could throw an offer one way or the other. So that could be, you got to pay attention to who you're talking to and why.
Yeah, no, 100% agree. And I've been doing the same kind of tactic now with my business partner, Patrick, right? So when we're going to make a hire or whatnot, we're always like, hey, take a look at this person, have a quick chat with them. What do you think? That second set of eyes is always helpful, and it leads to better
Story
results.
about that, John. It's pretty incredible. I was managing a CEO search for a 200-person nonprofit, and one of my teammates who's very experienced had done the first line vetting. She was helping going through we had hundreds and hundreds of applicants and was quickly vetting people to then have me talk to the most qualified as they bubbled up and they came through the pipeline. And she was doing the searching as well. So she does that first vetting and it's awesome, very deep, but then comes to me for more skill-based questions. So I had 8 questions to ask. It was all buttoned down. And what happened was this candidate gets on, this is for a CEO, John, gets on, folds her arms, leans back and says, so who are you in this process? Not reading the room. It was really condescending. And it was sort of like, okay, little girl, how do I get past you so I can talk to the real decision makers? And so my answer was, well, the board chair is on my speed dial. I talk to her every day, multiple times a day, and I'm the one advising the board on their entire candidate pipeline and decision-making process. And they've hired me to upskill them on their interview prep. She sat right up.
Yeah.
You got to read the room.
I really hate those, those kind of condescending people. It's
no
not,
humility.
Not a good look.
No, and that's where the executive presence comes into play. And I will tell you that person did advance through Not because I wanted to advance the person, I would have cut that. That was just not great. However, the board wanted to still consider the individual. Here's one of the coolest tricks I have in my bag as a coach because of this experience is for the people who are vying for very senior level roles where there's the possibility of a finalist presentation. There's 1 to 3 of you who are similarly qualified. It is an opportunity to ask the recruiter, is there a chance I can get 25 minutes to do a presentation and field Q&A for a total of an hour so people can hear the way I think. I'll share what I've learned about the company, and I will share some things about myself so people know who I am and field questions. And that's where one candidate completely rose above the noise and stood out. I got tears in my eyes actually when I was listening to that particular presentation. And then the other person exhibited some of the behaviors that turned me off in that first interview in front of 30 people. So, these things are hard to overcome if you can't hide who you are, for that long of a process.
Yeah, and I think there is limits though between long enough of a process and too long. And I think,
Oh my gosh, yes.
there's you got to think about that as well. Sometimes more interviews is not always the correct space, and that's I can go on into that.
A whole nother problem.
Yeah, it's a whole other thing. And I think we're there for time for today though. And I really enjoyed our conversation. Appreciate you coming on today with our podcast here.
Thank you. I always love talking to you, John.
Thanks.